to PY111, Introduction to Philosophy. My name is Matt Birch. I'm a philosopher in the School of Philosophy and Art History. I'm also the director of the Interdisciplinary Studies Center, and my principal research specialism is applied phenomenology. Happy to talk to you about that if you're interested in knowing what that is. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas. I got my PhD from Rice University in Houston, Texas. But I've lived in a number of places in the United States on both coasts and a number of places in between. I also have lived in Spain and France and Germany, but I made my way to England and the University of Essex in 2013, and I've been here since.
Hi everyone, my name is Camille. I'm going to be teaching the class sessions for some of you on this term's Intro to Philosophy. I'm about to begin the third year of my PhD degree here at Essex, and I'm working with Matt, your lecturer for this module. When it's finished, my thesis is going to be an investigation into the way in which forgetting makes us who we are. So I'm working mostly in the philosophy of memory and also in phenomenology. I grew up in a little town in Dorset in the southwest of England. I escaped, took my BA and then my MA in philosophy at the University of Essex, and as I mentioned, I'm now doing a PhD. During that time, I've lived in Colchester, Cambridge, Amsterdam, and now I'm living in Brussels. I'm looking forward to meeting those of you in my classes, so take care for now, and I will see you soon.
This term in PY11, Introduction to Philosophy, we are going to explore two important philosophical and existential questions, namely, what kind of knower do I want to be? And what kind of knowledge community do I want to belong to? I want to focus on these questions for at least 4 reasons. One, I think it speaks directly to your existential circumstances as students. Right now, you're embarking on 3 to 4 years of study at the undergraduate level. And those 3 to 4 years are going to be the most important years for most of you when it comes to shaping what kind of mind that you have. So unless you go on to some kind of postgraduate study, this will be the most intensive period of study in your life, and it's going to shape what kind of knower that you end up being. So it makes sense to me, if you think about it that way, if you think about your education as essentially creating the kind of mind and therefore shaping the kind of knower that you're going to end up being, it makes sense to ask, well, what kind of options are there? What different ways of being a knower exist? And what kind of knower in particular do I want to be at the end of this process? To me, it just makes sense to think about that as you go on and enter into this process of shaping the kind of mind that you have. And I also think it makes sense, but because just simply in virtue of joining a department, you are entering into a knowledge community. So to me, it makes sense to reflect on, well, what different kind of knowledge communities are there? And what kind of knowledge community do I want to belong to? Because whether you do it intentionally or not, the way you conduct yourself here for the next 3 to 4 years is going to shape and influence the kind of knowledge community that you belong to. So to me, it makes sense to kind of reflectively, transparently think about what kind of knowledge community you actually want to be part of, and then to actively try to shape it into that type of community. The second reason that I think that these are good questions for you to study in an introduction to philosophy is because these are questions that we, as philosophers, are uniquely positioned to help you think about. So the first reason was about you, and the second reason is about us. So a more traditional target question for an introduction to philosophy is the question of the good life. What's the best form of life for a human being? And that's an excellent philosophical question, and it is one that you should definitely dedicate some time to in the time that you spend studying philosophy with us. But here's the thing. The professional philosophers aren't particularly known for actually leading flourishing lives. So if you think about it, it's sort of an open question whether philosophers would be in a good position, at least professional philosophers, not philosophers like Socrates or who are out there in the streets mixing it up, engaged in a kind of exemplary form of life. But academic philosophers, people like me, who spend their time teaching or doing academic research and who are not famous for work-life balance, are those people really in a position to help you engage in that question about what kind of life you should be living? Maybe, probably. I don't want to say that we're not in a position to do that, but what we're really known for, what we really excel at, are things like making good arguments, evaluating evidence, assessing when and whether people have good reasons to believe things. Those are the things that we are especially well positioned to help you with. And so if you think of it that way, it makes sense to have these questions be the ones that we sort of talk about first together. What kind of knower do I want to be? What kind of knowledge community do I want to belong to? Those are things that we're really well positioned to talk to you about. The third reason that I think these are good questions is that these questions are actually intimately bound up with ethical questions in a way that often goes unacknowledged. And that is something that I really want to highlight and focus on. And my motto for capturing that idea is that the epistemic is ethical. In case you don't know, episteme is the ancient Greek word for knowledge. It's one of the 5 types of intellectual virtue that Aristotle identifies in the Nicomachean Ethics. Episteme. It's often translated as knowledge or scientific knowledge. And epistemology is the study of knowledge. And something epistemic is something that pertains to knowledge. And so, what do I mean when I say the epistemic is ethical? I mean that questions pertaining to knowledge have far-reaching ethical implications. And I mean the refrain intentionally to kind of resonate with the expression from the feminist tradition, or the tradition in feminist philosophy, that the personal is political. So what does that mean? The basic idea, to put it crudely, is that the way we conduct our personal lives has far-reaching political implications. So if you look at Western industrialized countries 50 to 60 to 70 years ago, people were making personal decisions, namely decisions about how to structure a family, in particular the idea that women would stay at home with children. And that was a personal decision, a decision that was made in the private sphere. But that personal decision, keeping women at home, kept them out of the workforce, it kept them politically unengaged, and that fundamentally shaped the politics of the countries where people were making those personal or seemingly merely personal decisions. I want to highlight something similar here in the case of the epistemic. The epistemic is ethical in the sense that the kind of knowers that we are and the kind of knowledge communities that we belong in are going to have these really far-reaching ethical implications. To just sort of give you a simple example that I think resonates with a lot of people, consider the closed-mindedness, dogmatism, and arrogance of the senior figures in the George Bush administration in the early 2000s. Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, these are people who are famous for being arrogant and closed-minded and dogmatic. And those epistemic traits had far-reaching ethical consequences. So they refused to listen to countervailing evidence, for example, about weapons of mass destruction. They went into what everyone now agrees was a totally disastrous war in 2003 in Iraq. And you have to ask the question, had they been different as knowers, would they have taken different actions? Would the ethical consequences of what that political leadership did have fundamentally changed? The obvious answer, the intuitive answer at least, seems to be yes. Final reason I want to give for focusing on these questions in this introductory module to philosophy is that these are really timely questions given the world that we live in right now. We're living in a world with an unprecedented capacity to spread information via social networks and other digital channels. And this means that we are living in an exciting time because we have this unprecedented capacity to share and collaboratively produce knowledge. But we're also living in an epistemically dangerous time where we have this unprecedented capacity to produce and purvey false information, to pass off misinformation as if it's knowledge. And I think that this is something that we as philosophers or philosophically minded individuals ought to reflect on. Right now, as you're listening to this, as you're being introduced to certain issues in epistemology, millions of people around the world are online listening to YouTube videos about wildly dangerous and outlandish conspiracy theories. They're being told things like Joe Biden is a pedivore. He's not only a pedophile who abuses children, but he also drinks the blood of his victims. People are online learning that the coronavirus is caused by 5G and that it's part of a Bill Gates plot to put a microchip in everyone and control the world. People are learning on these YouTube channels that the climate crisis is a hoax propagated by the Chinese government. I think we live in uniquely epistemically dangerous times with this incredible capacity to spread misinformation as if it's knowledge. So that's why I want to focus this term on these two questions. What kind of knower do I want to be? What kind of knowledge community do I want to belong to? First question, what kind of knower do I want to be? That's a question that's treated by a branch of philosophy that's called virtue epistemology. Virtue epistemology focuses on the characteristics of a mind that make an individual person an excellent knower. And then the question, what kind of knowledge community do I want to belong to? That's a question that belongs to the field of social epistemology. And social epistemology is this interdisciplinary study of the many ways that human beings socially acquire, create, construct, transmit, store, and revise knowledge. And it studies the building blocks of good knowledge communities. And what we're going to do in our first week is we're going to look at some of these conspiracy theories, and we're going to read a piece by Qasim Qassam where he looks at conspiracy theories through the lens of virtue epistemology, or actually a branch of virtue epistemology called Beist epistemology, and a piece by Neil Levy that considers conspiracy theories through the standpoint of social epistemology. And what we'll see is that the approaches differ. There's some tension between them, right? There's a tension between looking at epistemically deficient individuals and focusing rather on epistemically deficient communities. Also, we're going to find, I think, that the two approaches are largely complementary. So there's tensions between them and there's complementarities, and it will be interesting for us to think about the extent of both. And finally, I want to start with conspiracy theories because I think it gives us a nice sort of window onto the ethical dimension of these questions. What I was talking about earlier, this idea that the epistemic is ethical. Thanks for your time. I'm really excited about this material, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with you.